and the motion adopted on Tuesday, February 1st, 2022, the committee will commence its study on human trafficking among women, girls, and gender-diverse people. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom. You will have the choice at the bottom of the screen of either for English or French, and for those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. And for those on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. As usual, we're going to do our trigger warning because that's what we do here in Status of Women. But before we welcome our witnesses, I would like to provide this trigger warning. This will be a difficult study. We will be discussing experiences related to abuse. This may be triggering to viewers, members, or staff with similar experiences. If you feel distressed or if you need help, please advise the clerk. And just like we have done in the last studies, if there's any issues at any time, just let us know and we can work together as we move forward. I would like now to welcome our guests for our first panel. From the Canadian Border Services Agency, we have Daniel Anson. He's the Director of General Intelligence and Investigations. From the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Michelle Vandebogart, Director General, Law Enforcement. And from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we have Superintendent Kimberly Taplin, Director General, National Crime Prevention, Indigenous Policing Services, as well as Captain Jennifer Demers, National Human Trafficking Section. We'll be providing you each with 5 minutes. When you see me start rolling my pen around, that means you've got about 15 seconds to kind of wrap it up. And that will start around at 4:45 in your comments. If we can get it as close to possible so we can get all of our questions through, that would be wonderful. So to start our speaking, we will pass it over to Daniel Anson. Daniel, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to all the members of the committee. I'm Daniel Anson, and I work with the Canada Border Services Agency. I will take a few moments to clarify the role and responsibilities of the agency in identifying and combating international human trafficking. As the committee is aware, the administration and enforcement of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, IRPA, falls under the responsibility of several government departments and agencies, while Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada has the primary responsibility to develop admissibility policy, which sets the conditions for entering and remaining in Canada, and to administer the IRPA. The CBSA shares responsibility with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for enforcing the IRPA. In the pursuit of its mandate, the agency shares information and intelligence with other government departments and law enforcement partners as required.
More specifically, the CBSA prevents, identifies, and interdicts suspected human traffickers in the cross-border movement and exploitation of victims, detects instances of trafficking, including those for the purposes of forced labor, contributes to the safety and security of potential victims by separating them from the control of suspected traffickers and referring them to appropriate government services, and supports the investigation and prosecution of offenders. The CBSA and the RCMP have a complementary approach in relation to immigration offences. While the RCMP is responsible for immigration offences related to organized crime, human trafficking, and national security, the CBSA has responsibility for the remaining immigration offences under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, or IRPA, which includes offences related to human smuggling, fraudulent documents, misrepresentation, and the general offence section under the Act. The agency will engage the RCMP should it discover indicators of human trafficking while investigating other offences. The CBSA refers all suspected human trafficking cases to the RCMP for investigation and refers potential victims to IRCC for support. As human trafficking and human smuggling are often confounded, I thought I would use the opportunity to differentiate the two offences. On one hand, human trafficking occurs when one party violates another's rights by depriving them of the freedom of choice for the purpose of exploitation. It can occur across and within borders and may involve extensive organized crime networks. It involves recruiting, transporting, or harboring individuals through force or other forms of coercion and deception. For example, these victims may be exploited for the sex trade, forced labor, or domestic servitude. Human smuggling, on the other hand, is a form of illegal migration that involves the organized transport of a person across an international border, usually in exchange for a sum of money and sometimes in dangerous conditions. When the final destination is reached, the business relationship ends and the smuggler and the individual part company. A person who has agreed to be smuggled into the country, however, may also become the victim of human trafficking at the hands of the smuggler. What is consistent is that the relationship between a human trafficker and the victim is continuous and extends beyond the border crossing. Victims may suffer abuse from the traffickers and may face severe consequences if they attempt to escape. Since 2012, the CBSA has been working with federal partners to implement the National Action Plan, now the Strategy to Combat Human Trafficking. As part of this commitment, CBSA officers receive training to recognize indicators associated with victims of human trafficking and on providing them with support through referrals to the appropriate government agencies. Despite best efforts, however, identifying victims of human trafficking at the border can be challenging. Potential victims may be unaware of what is in store for them beyond their entry into the country. Furthermore, if they do not know they are being exploited, they may be intimidated and refuse to seek or receive help. The CBSA takes the issue of international trafficking of women, girls, and gender-diverse individuals very seriously. Situations such as sexual exploitation and domestic servitude disproportionately affect these populations. Some estimates indicate that roughly 90% of victims of sex trafficking in Canada are women and girls. Human traffickers reap large profits while robbing victims of their freedom, their dignity, and their human potential. The CBSA is an active and engaged partner in combating human trafficking by detecting and disrupting trafficking operations and the transport of victims to Canada. We continue to work with our partners with the common goal of preventing Canada from being a destination, source, or transit company for this criminal behavior. This concludes my opening statement. Again, thank you for the opportunity to highlight the agency's role and impact. I will be very happy to answer any questions from the committee. Thank you.
I'm now going to pass it over to Michelle Van de Bogart from the Director of General Law Enforcement for Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. Michelle.
Thank you very much. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge the traditional unceded land on which we are gathered today, that of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Michelle Van de Bogart. I am the Director General of Law Enforcement at Public Safety Canada. I'll be providing opening remarks on behalf of Public Safety, and I'm pleased to take your questions during this panel. I applaud you and committee members for this discussion on a topic that is of critical importance for the human rights of women, girls, and gender-diverse people in Canada: human trafficking. We know that human trafficking is a highly gendered crime, with root causes often related to power imbalance, gender inequality, and discrimination. The fact being that women and girls are most often targeted for purposes of sexual exploitation due to a combination of social, economic, and cultural factors. The Government of Canada has long recognized the importance of a comprehensive, coordinated, and multifaceted strategy to respond to this crime. Anti-human trafficking efforts are being undertaken by numerous Government of Canada departments and agencies, including the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Canada Border Service Agencies, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, Statistics Canada, and others whom you'll hear from throughout your study. Public Safety Canada is the federal department responsible for leading the national strategy to combat human trafficking since its launch in 2019. The national strategy brings together federal efforts under one strategic framework. It's based on internationally recognized pillars of prevention, protection, prosecution, partnership, and also includes an empowerment pillar, which focuses on enhancing supports for victims affected by this crime. Approximately $75 million in funding has been allocated to the national strategy between 2018 and 2024. This includes an investment of $14.5 million for the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline. The national strategy is now in its last year. Progress and achievements have been gained, but there is much more to do. As an evergreen strategy, we continue to adapt it to changing circumstances and the needs of our communities. I'd like to highlight a few successes under each pillar of the strategy. Under the empowerment pillar, the Government of Canada invested up to $22.4 million for 63 organizations that are working to prevent human trafficking and support at-risk populations and survivors. This was a joint announcement with the Department of Women and Gender Equality Canada. These projects have and will continue to increase access to services and supports for victims and survivors, raise awareness of human trafficking among youth at risk, and develop innovative technological ideas to combat human trafficking. Most recently, Public Safety entered into a funding agreement with Victim Services Toronto for Project Recover, a collaborative endeavor to help survivors of human trafficking resolve fraudulent debt incurred in their name by traffickers. Raising awareness of human trafficking among Canadians is critical. Under the prevention pillar, Public Safety launched the award-winning awareness campaign entitled "It's Not What It Seems" to educate the public, especially youth and parents, about human trafficking. This year, Public Safety's marketing team is working on the planning and development of awareness material for Indigenous audiences. A significant initiative under the protection pillar has been our continued support for the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline, a multilingual toll-free service available 24/7 that refers victims to local law enforcement, shelters, and a range of other supports and services. Under this pillar, we are also working to develop guidelines and training tools for frontline service providers, including specific guidelines to support Indigenous survivors. As for the prosecution pillar, I'll defer to my colleagues to speak to their prosecution efforts on investigations and cross-border movements. Finally, the Government of Canada recognizes that maintaining and developing strong partnerships within and outside of the Government of Canada is critical to Canada's success in combating human trafficking. Under the partnership pillar, engagement with provinces and territories have been central in supporting our collective responses to this crime, notably through the Public Safety Canada-led Federal Provincial Territorial Trafficking and Persons Working Group and the FPT Ministers responsible for Justice and Public Safety tables. These remain important fora for federal, provincial, and territorial partners to come together in order to leverage one another's efforts to combat human trafficking. I'd like to conclude by acknowledging that labor trafficking, the trafficking of Indigenous women and girls, the 2S LGBTQIA+ persons and migrants, the use of technology in human trafficking, data collection efforts, and protecting newcomers from human trafficking, including Ukrainian nationals in Canada, are some of the key issues that have been garnering more attention recently and that will require increased collaboration in the next few years. With this in mind, I'd like to thank the committee for initiating this important dialogue today, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Very much. And for our final speakers, I would like to pass it over to the Superintendent for the RCMP, Kim Taplin. Kim, you have the floor.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. I speak with gratitude from the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. As mentioned, I'm Superintendent Kim Taplin, Director General of the RCMP National Crime Prevention and Indigenous Policing Services. I'm joined today by Corporal Jennifer Demers, a member of the National Human Trafficking Section. Thank you for inviting us here as part of your study on human trafficking of women, girls, and gender diverse people. I would like to begin by explaining the mandate and work of the RCMP, and specifically the National Human Trafficking Section, and sharing some key points on human trafficking in the Canadian context. The RCMP across Canada supports the Government of Canada's national strategy to combat human trafficking and remains committed to addressing human trafficking in collaboration with federal and provincial governments and agencies, non-government organizations, and law enforcement partners. These networks are crucial for police and non-government organizations to identify and help victims of human trafficking. The National Human Trafficking Section centrally facilitates the RCMP's efforts in countering human trafficking through awareness, education, and community outreach by building and enhancing partnerships, supporting operations, advancing operational policy, and through internal and external reporting. The National Human Trafficking Section does not conduct specific investigations, but rather supports investigators and acts as a policy center to educate and raise awareness on human trafficking. For example, recently on March 9th, the RCMP hosted the Human Trafficking and Sexual Exploitation of Men and Boys training workshop for the RCMP, Canadian Armed Forces, Public Safety, CPSA, other police services, including other government departments and service providers. This event focused on assisting law enforcement on human trafficking modus operandi in relation to relation to male victims, and gender diverse victims were part of the subject matter covered during the workshop. Anyone can become a victim of human trafficking. However, factors such as age, geographic location, socioeconomic background, and ethnicity can contribute to unique challenges that put certain populations at particular risk. As my colleague from CBSA shared, human trafficking does not necessarily require the crossing of borders or any movement at all. Exploitation, as defined by the Criminal Code, is the key element of the offense. Exploitation occurs when someone forces another person to provide labor or a sexual service by having them fear for their safety and the safety of someone known to them. Domestic human trafficking is when all stages of the crime occur in Canada and there is no international cross-border movements. International human trafficking is when the victim who, in the process of being trafficked, crosses an international border. The full extent of human trafficking is difficult to assess due to the clandestine nature of these offenses and the reluctance of victims and witnesses to come forward to law enforcement. In some observed cases, it is apparent that some victims may not have been aware that they were being exploited. The RCMP conducts proactive outreach initiatives and investigative probes into potential human trafficking offenses. One of the most important sources are the lived experience experts, the survivors. Our partnerships help to empower them to tell their story and educate law enforcement to recognize the signs of human trafficking. It is also important for law enforcement to have knowledge of the strategies employed by traffickers when conducting their investigations. In 2022, the RCMP attended an Ontario penitentiary to interview an inmate who had been incarcerated for human trafficking-related charges. The intent of the interview was to get a trafficker's perspective of how he became a trafficker and why he committed these crimes. The interview was recorded and will be incorporated into training for law enforcement. The RCMP collaborates with domestic and international partners to ensure a coordinated approach to detecting and investigating and combating human trafficking. The RCMP also helps build prevention initiatives and refer victims to victim services and community-based resources where available for assistance and support. Human trafficking is an important topic and a grave offense. Corporal Demers and I are pleased to be here to answer your questions and to provide information on the projects, initiatives, and products that our team has been working on within the past few years. We also appreciate the work you are doing. Thank you for continuing to bring attention to this crucial area that impacts the lives, health, and well-being of women, girls, and gender-diverse people.
Much. And I will begin by saying I apologize to Corporal Demers. I called you Captain. It's Corporal. I apologize, and we want to make sure that we get that straight. We will be going on to our rounds of 6 minutes, and so each party will start off with 6 minutes. I'm going to pass the floor now to Anna Roberts for the first 6.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. This is an important study, and I have a few questions, and I'm not sure who can answer them. Can you explain to me, Canada remains on the Tier 1. What does that mean exactly? Okay, Michelle?
Oh, I'm sorry. So perhaps, do you mean Tier 1 from the Trafficking in Persons report
Yes.
from the United States
Yes.
of America?
Yes.
So each year the United States does an analysis and evaluation of
Right.
other countries,
Okay.
and we're pleased to report that we continue to remain on Tier 1, which means that the work that we're doing under the national strategy, the work that we're doing at the federal, provincial, and territorial levels is actively working to deal with the human trafficking area. That doesn't mean that we don't have more work to do, but very pleased to report that we remain on Tier 1.
Okay, and so there was a mention earlier that individual police officers, RCMP, are trained. And is that an online training that is commenced? Kimberly? Yeah, thank you. If I can call you that, sorry. Sergeant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The National Human Trafficking Section has worked to create or update existing training for our law enforcement personnel. Most recently, we conducted an environmental scan of some leading training that is available, and in 2021, we updated that online training. In addition to the online training, there is also training available to all law enforcement as well at the Canadian Police College, and that is a 10-day course, and it is delivered in person to law enforcement across Canada.
Is that called the Can You See Me? Because I think I went through that. Is that the one that you're referring to? That training program? No?
From the Canadian Police College?
Yeah.
I would have to confirm the proper name for that.
Okay. So I was quite interested and had an opportunity to do some, I spoke with a police officer in my riding about the situation with human trafficking, and he helped me understand a couple of the criminal codes. So I'm a little confused with it. So Criminal Code Section 279.01 and 279.011 criminalize sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Penalties range from 4 to 14 years imprisonment for trafficking adults and 5 to 14 years imprisonments for trafficking children. I also understood that some of these criminals that do obtain or are arrested, they will ask their solicitor, their lawyer, to not force the bail on them because the time that they serve prior to the court date guarantees them 1.5 times the, so for example, if they served 100 days, they get 150 days waived off the penalty, and that the penalties are not that strict. Some of them don't even serve 2 years. Do you think that the penalties that they obtain fit the crime?
Madam Chair, for that question. The RCMP's role is to enforce the laws and not to comment on prosecution or penalties.
Would you agree with me that the penalties, though, speaking to some people through the policing, they have said that the problem is that they get arrested, they go to court, they get out, and then they start all over again. Would you agree that because I know for a fact that the federal government did not maintain a national database, so how do we control these criminals from reoffending? Is there something that the government needs to change so that we ensure that these children and that are trafficked are not ever, that they don't fall into this trap again?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Did not come here prepared, nor is it appropriate for me to provide advice to this committee with respect to sentencing prosecution.
So would you agree that a database is important to be maintained so that we have better control so that the criminals do not continue to practice in trafficking and we can protect our victims? Would you agree to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. Again, I'm not here to provide advice to the committee at this time. I'm happy to answer other questions.
Because I think from my understanding is that the laws do not fit the crime and we continue to have these issues. I looked at some numbers and they're pretty scary. The increase in children and young adults that are being trafficked. How do we stop that if we don't have the sentencings that suit the crime? I think that we need to improve the laws to ensure that the individuals are kept behind bars until they fully understand what they've done. So I guess that's more of a question I have to ask the justice system. So I do apologize. I'm not trying to put you in that position. It's just after going through some of these exercises and going through some of these videos, it becomes pretty advantageous that we're not doing enough. But thank you.
Thank you so much. We're now going to turn it over for the next 6 minutes to Jenna Sutz. Jenna, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us today and for the incredible work that you all do day in and day out. I'll direct my first question to Mr. Anson. I'm wondering if you can speak to, from your experience, the biggest challenge that you see related to preventing human trafficking across our borders.
Thank you for the question. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would certainly speak to the biggest challenge that we face from an agency perspective, and that is really that this is a covert activity that occurs at the border point. So it's very rare, if ever, that the evidence or indicators of trafficking in persons presents at a port of entry on arrival. Quite frequently, the challenge that we face is that a lot of the arrivals could be through otherwise legitimate purposes or for other reasons. So temporary foreign workers, it could be temporary residence permit, regular immigration channels, or International Experience Canada channels. What you tend to see is that there's a legitimate entry into Canada, and then the force, the fraud, and the coercion occurs afterwards. In parallel, the increased problem that we face regarding human smuggling only additionally puts people that have been smuggled into Canada further at risk, in that it gives a significant amount of leverage and risk to potential traffickers over the person that has been smuggled. For example, they might not necessarily have an actual authorization to work as a foreign national. They may not have still control of their legitimate passports. They might be relying on fraudulent documents. And these are different types of these are different methods that a trafficker will use to continue that leverage, whether it's promises of family reunification or otherwise. So really what the challenge is for us is that there's only a limited window where the agency can provide an interdiction opportunity at a port of entry, where they would immediately separate the trafficker from the victim and ensure that the people that have already been victimized or traumatized are then able to obtain services and support from some of our domestic or our federal partners. So I think that to directly answer your question, Ms. Suds and Madam Chair, it's really the fact that there's limited ability for us to directly address and identify, even though we put a significant amount of effort into intelligence reporting, into identification and enumeration of indicators, patterns, and trends of trafficking. And then we do our best to ensure that that training is distributed to border services officers across the country, is shared across our dedicated expert working group, and is systematized within the training given to BSOs at the officer induction course at Rigaud at the college, as well as for ongoing human trafficking training, or training to ensure that they're able to identify that. So that's the challenge we have. We do refer all situations or cases or suspected cases of human trafficking to federal law enforcement partners, be it police of jurisdiction or our partners within the RCMP. But I would say if I had to distill it down to one issue, that's really where we face the greatest challenge in protecting the ports of entry and the access to Canada.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. Speaking of partners, I'll direct my next question to either Superintendent Taplin or perhaps Corporal Nemours, if you'd like to respond as well. Thinking about, or taking a look at the national strategy to combat human trafficking, from what I have read over the course of the last week in preparation, I think we're seeing the evidence shows we're seeing an increased use of technology when it comes to human trafficking. And of particular concern, I think, is intranet child exploitation. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to the work that you're doing with respect to child exploitation leveraging technology.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. I didn't come today prepared to speak to specifically child exploitation. The expertise for that area rests within a specific area within the RCMP, but I would be happy to endeavor to take back that question and provide a written response for the committee.
Thank you very much. Can you speak to the leveraging of technology in a greater way with respect to human trafficking in general, or no? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. I know that technology is impacting our lives in so many areas, and again, this is one of the areas that we're seeing an increase in use of technology. And I would like to turn the floor over to my colleague, Corporal Demers, and perhaps she could speak more specifically with respect to human trafficking.
Thank you, Superintendent Taplin, and thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. At this time, I do not personally in our unit use technology, so again, we would be more than happy to get that answer for you in writing to make sure that you get a full scope of it.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and not to put you on the spot at all. Very quickly to Ms. Van de Bogart. You spoke about the importance of partnerships, so the FPT tables and the work that's happening with your partnerships.
Very quick.
Can you, I just wanted you to share the importance of that collaborative approach in this work. We might not have time, though.
You've got about 10, 15 seconds max.
So very quickly, we are doing lots of work in collaboration is important, not only with our partners at the FPT tables, but what we heard in our 2018 Across Canada consultations from survivors is that we need to ensure that we are meeting regularly with our stakeholders as well. And I would love to tell you about the webinars that we do
Next time, yeah.
engage in that.
Thank you so much. We're now going to pass it over to Adrienne LaRoche. Adrienne, 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being with us on this very important study. I've been meaning to ask this question for a long time as a member of the group on human trafficking. And this year we had the 3rd Awareness Day on this issue on February 22nd. You mentioned it, you all mentioned it, that there was a lack of knowledge that we have on this issue. There is a need for awareness. People believe that human trafficking is something that goes on outside of our borders, whereas a lot of victims are Canadians. So it's happening within our borders. This is an example of the lack of awareness and knowledge that Canadians have on this topic. My first question will be for Mr. Anson, but if anyone has anything to add, please do. Canada, in 2005, adopted legislation against human trafficking, and it is continuing to work, but between 2009 and 2018, police services highlighted over 1,000 incidents of human trafficking, but you stated it. This is only after police intervention. In fact, the number of victims is most likely a lot higher. Do you have any more recent data on these cases? You mentioned that it is difficult to have data, but do you still have a more current idea of the situation? My question is for Mr. Anson, but if any of the other witnesses have any updated information, they could share that as well.
Merci beaucoup pour la
Thank you for the question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I would say at the outset that certainly appreciate that perspective, and again, an appreciation for the statistics is very important. The CBSA, unfortunately, does not necessarily have the same domestic mandate in tracking and or addressing issues of human trafficking or suspected cases in the prosecution. We do participate with our police of jurisdiction, national policing partners in ensuring that continued awareness and identification of indicators, trends, and warnings are shared to inform police of jurisdiction in their domestic investigative processes, as well as to provide greater awareness across federal partners of all departments. So definitely recognizing that awareness is absolutely key. Aside from our ability to support our domestic policing partners, that is not necessarily something that we track or identify. Again, the only thing that I would also add to support your question would really be that based on a variety of different methods of arrival within Canada, people can often be deterred from reporting incidences of human trafficking. It's important to, again, recognize that many of these people are susceptible to coercion and to fraud and to potential indentured service. So in addition, they may be fleeing persecution, they may be fleeing natural disasters, dictatorships, or discrimination based on gender, sexual orientation, religion, race, or color, whatever that might be. So there might also be a tend to shy away from reporting certain incidences to authorities based on the fact that they may have arrived from countries where there may not be the same type of trust within your national law enforcement or national security partners. So in terms of the statistics and the ability to address the issue domestically, I would definitely have to defer to our domestic policing partners. Mais merci pour la question, madame.
But thank you for your question.
Thank you. If I may just add, my understanding is that you're going to be hearing from Statistics Canada, and we work in close collaboration with them to get information. We do know this is an underreported crime, but from 2022, just a few high-level statistics that I can share with you today, but they will be able to talk to you about more of the statistics in relation to human trafficking, is that we know that 96% are women and girls. This is from data from 2022. Most of them knew their traffickers, so 91% of them knew their traffickers, and 1/3 of victims that were trafficked by an intimate partner. So sharing a little bit of high-level statistics, but I know that our colleagues from Statistics Canada will be able to greatly assist you in that area.
Parfait.
Thank you. I'll continue with you. In 2019, the government implemented new measures through a national strategy. Can you tell us what the national strategy to combat human trafficking helped change? You mentioned that you work with StatsCan, but do you have any other partnerships that you could share throughout this strategy that would help us at our committee?
Thank you for the question. So maybe I could highlight a couple of things. I mentioned in my opening statement that the Government of Canada funded 63 projects. Public safety specifically funded 20 of those projects. The funding has gone to grassroots organizations across country to work with both victims and survivors. 12 of those are empowerment projects, and the rest of them are prevention projects. 15 of those projects support Indigenous peoples. 2 of those are Indigenous-led, and many of them welcome diverse gender people as well. That is important work that's being done. Those the projects have been going on for between 3 and 4 years, and as I mentioned, we're entering our last year of the evaluation, and what we will be doing is hearing both achievements and lessons learned from there. So that's one of the areas where I believe we're making a
Thank you so much.
difference.
We're now going to pass it over to Leah Gazan. Leah, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. My first question is for Superintendent Taplin. We know that there's ongoing issues with systemic discrimination and sexual violence in the RCMP, and I want to point to an article that was published in the CBC in May 2021 in response to the Canadian Feminist Alliance for International Action, where they state that the report states that they show evidence of a pattern of discrimination, harassment, and assault against women by officers of the RCMP. It goes on to state that if female RCMP, in quotes, and this is from Pam Palmater, and this is a quote, if female RCMP officers are not safe from sexual assaults by male officers, it should be no surprise that marginalized Indigenous women and girls are not safe either, said Palmater. And I want to point to an article that was published in the CBC in 2015 about Officer Kevin Theriault in northern Manitoba, who took an intoxicated woman home from her jail cell with the permission of the supervising officer to pursue a relationship. And I don't have the exact quote, but in light he said, you know, you arrested her, you can do whatever the F you want to do with her. And this was reported in the CBC. What's concerning to me is that RCMP continue to investigate their own allegations of misconduct. So I'm wondering what you have done, the RCMP is doing, to address this kind of grotesque systemic racism and sexual violence that continues to happen, particularly against Indigenous women and girls.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. First, the RCMP is one of approximately 150 police agencies across Canada, and the National Human Trafficking Section is conducting a national environmental scan, which will identify trends, gaps, needs, and best practices related to human trafficking investigations and will help to raise awareness. The first phase of the scan was a file review of RCMP human trafficking cases, and the second phase...
Sorry, just because I have limited time, I'm not talking about what the RCMP is doing to address sex trafficking. I'm asking a question about what is the RCMP doing to mitigate and manage their own involvement in sex trafficking. And I would point to Northern Manitoba and the woman that was taken out of the jail cell as an act of sex trafficking. So that's the question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Madam Chair, for clarifying that question. I didn't come here prepared to speak to certainly the RCMP actions with respect to internal allegations with respect to how we, in your words, how we may or may not treat each other internally.
However, I'll leave it there just out of fairness to you, and if you could maybe follow up with a written brief. And it actually was a confirmed case of sexual trafficking. It wasn't an allegation. It was actually confirmed. So my next question for you, we know that over half of the cases of sex trafficking, we know that no suspect is identified. This was in a report by StatsCan, March 31st, 2021. And that 2/3 of cases result in criminal proceedings being stopped with a decision of stayed, withdrawn, dismissed, or discharged cases. What is the RCMP doing about this in terms of, compiling appropriate evidence so that these cases don't fall through the cracks?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for your question. The RCMP endeavors to investigate all reported or found human trafficking cases or all investigations. We use the tools that are provided. We have recently updated our human trafficking policy that includes guidance for investigations as well as and furthermore, we are working with survivors of human trafficking to strengthen our investigative policies and procedures.
Thank you very much. How much time do I have, Chair? You have 24 seconds. Okay, that's not a lot of time. Maybe I'll just start and then I'll follow up with you, Mr. Anson. So it's been reported that a lot of migrant sex workers won't come forward because of fear of deportation, especially in situations where they experience a violence. I'm going to leave that there, and then I'm going to come back in the next round and ask you some questions.
Excellent.
About that.
Thank you so much. We're going to be starting our next round. It's 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 2.5, 2.5. And so we'll start off with Dominique. Dominique, 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to ask for short answers because we don't have a lot of time. In your opening remarks, Mr. Ensign and Ms. Van de Bogart, you talked about the national strategy against human trafficking, but you also mentioned an action plan. One is from 2019, one is from 2012. Does each organization have its own action plan? Are you working in silos? How do all these strategies and action plans work? How are they efficient and operational?
So the national strategy to combat human trafficking that we're speaking about today was launched in 2019, but there was a previous strategy that started in 2012. So we have been, as a Government of Canada, working collaboratively together since that time to continue to build on this. So it's just building on what was being done with the work that we commenced in 2012.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. For the Canadians who are listening to us today, they might have a vague idea of what human trafficking is. If I asked you today to tell us what it looks like, how would you respond so that the average Canadian would understand?
If I had to respond, it's very difficult because there's a variety of different types of exploitation that is unfortunately used by prospective traffickers of humans. I've tried to learn as much as I can, and I will continue to learn about this. But there are a variety of different concepts that I think people misassociate with what I would term the chains of modern slavery. It could be anything from forced labor. It is to sexual exploitation. It is anything that is done to force somebody against their will to conduct an activity that is most likely, in many cases, and certainly related to human trafficking for horrible purposes. So whether it's forced labor and where it might manifest in the construction or agricultural workers, where it's exploiting people that arrive to Canada seeking freedom from persecution, or whether it's people being forced into sexual exploitation to be exploited for sexual purposes, which again, my colleague, Ms. van der Bogart, explained that approximately 96% of people are exploited for sexual purposes, and of all the people that are trafficked in are all victims of human trafficking. That is 71% of them are also for sexual exploitation purposes. So what does it look like today? Well, it is in all environments. It is all classes of society. It is in a variety of different industries. It is something that the efforts to raise awareness, I think, are some of the best methods that we can do to combat it. To speak to the point on silos as well, though, we do work effectively together, both within the police and law enforcement regulatory bodies, but also internationally under the partnerships pillar. We are also working with international partners to raise awareness, certainly at source countries where people are potentially trafficked into Canada. So it looks like a lot of different things, ma'am and Madam Chair, and it's something that we are continuing to evolve. Our intelligence reporting continues to provide indicators as to what it looks like today, so we can get better at identifying it and addressing it.
Thank you. I apologize for interrupting you, but I don't have a lot of time. There's talks about an information campaign being launched, and so you would be reaching out to Canadians. You have MPs here in the room who have offices in their ridings who receive foreign workers, for example. How can my colleagues and I identify the signs? Would we be able to detect situations or signs that could alert us? What could we think of in such cases that would potentially alert us that we might have a feeling that something is going on?
I could provide some ideas related to potentially foreign workers and the role that the CBSA provides in providing validation inspections of potential foreign workers. Are people working extended hours? Are work sites cordoned off? Are people not allowed to talk to the public? Are they working weekends? Are there children that are not going to school? There are a variety of different indicators. There's a lot of information available publicly, and again, if I could maybe finish, since I do have 10 seconds, there is a human trafficking hotline. It's 1-833-900-1010. And if anyone ever has any questions, you call 1-833-900-1010, and you can secure certainly more information. You'll have dedicated expertise to support you and to potentially provide things that you could look for, as well as which police jurisdiction you might want to refer the issue to.
Thank you so much, and that was really important information to get on record. I'm now going to pass it over for the next 5 minutes to Emanuela Lambropoulos. Emanuela.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for coming to give us some information on human trafficking and what our government's doing as a response. Earlier, Mr. Anson, you spoke to the fact that when people arrive at the border, they don't have a sign that says that they've been trafficked. They don't come in, and we don't discover it until later on. So there's a short window where an intervention can actually be made in order to help the victim and to make sure that things get taken care of. Is there anything we're doing at these border service offices where people are coming in, doing interviews, whatever it is, that kind of, I'm not sure how often it happens that someone shows up and is trafficked, or eventually that it's clear that they have been, but is there anything at the border that we're doing that can let someone feel comfortable expressing, hey, like, I'm not in a good place, or I know it's difficult for them to come out. They're in danger a lot of the time. Is there anything more that could be done at the border to kind of get these people to feel more comfortable with coming out or seeking help if they're in a situation where, they don't necessarily want to be in?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly a very difficult, complex question, because to provide awareness to people that are potentially being trafficked, or what I would surmise at that stage is likely being smuggled into Canada, it's very difficult to raise their awareness. What I would maybe state to address your question, and Madam Chair, as well as the previous question, is that raising awareness domestically is really a really important part of this, and ensuring that people are able to identify indicators after arrival in Canada. I can't speak to what could be done at the borders, but what I would say what is being done at the borders, and we rely significantly on our border services officers, the BSOs, to apply a very wide range of over 100 pieces of legislation, from the Customs Act to IRPA. But this is something that they're very determined and very emotional about, ensuring that we interdict at the an issue that we interdict at the border. What I would provide as a response to give you the comfort that hopefully will hopefully follow is that in a circumstance where a situation of suspected human trafficking occurs at the border, the first thing that's going to happen is the BSO is going to separate the potential victim from the person that is trafficking them. And from that point, there's a range of different procedures that will follow that will be adhered to by the BSO and will likely lead to detention and potentially referral for investigation to police of jurisdiction or the RCMP. But it's at that stage that the person has been traumatized and the suspected person that is being trafficked, that person will have access to, from our federal partners, a range of different services and support that are typically offered through Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. And the other thing that I would add to that, too, is that quite often, and something that we hear quite frequently, is that people are afraid to come forward because they risk deportation. Every case is different, but there are a variety of different support services available to people that raise the issue of them potentially being trafficked, both from emergency housing, emergency funding, and support services, but also the variety of different types of status in Canada, whether it's an open work permit for vulnerable workers or temporary residence permit for victims of trafficking in person. So there is a support mechanism that is in place and is immediately actionable at the border. BSOs receive this training so that they have this top of mind and are able to take action and interdict should they suspect a victim being trafficked through the border, through a port of entry into Canada. Thank you very much for the question, Madam Chair.
And if they are caught later on, is there a risk of being deported, or are they protected? Because as you said, there's a risk and a danger because of the traffickers themselves that they pose on these people. Is there protection in place, and do you work with your partners to ensure that they'll have a safe route, let's say?
Thank you again for the question. And again, I appreciate taking this line of questioning to a bit more towards a mature response, because I think it's very important to raise some of the awareness of some of the support and services that are available. I cannot speak on behalf of IRCC other than to state the existence of a variety of different mechanisms that are in place to protect people that might have already been traumatized from being re-victimized. The IRCC at its disposal when assessing cases have the ability to stay removals. There are pre-removal risk assessments that are done prior to somebody being deported or placed on a removal order, a removal list. They have the ability to make refugee protection claims. They can also apply for humanitarian and compassionate grounds to stay their removal. So These are in place. These are certainly the domain of our federal policing partners, and we support them as police jurisdiction and RCMP support them in providing the amount of information to inform their decision-making about every individual case. So thank you again.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We're now passing it over to Adrienne for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you again to the witnesses for being with us today. We're hearing dates 2012, a new strategy, 2019, a new national strategy, but the numbers are still showing that there's an increase of human trafficking. And it specifically impacts women, 96% of women and girls. What's even worse is that it's only the tip of the iceberg, because victims, and it's a sensitive issue, it's very difficult for them to ask for help, and they don't know what help they're going to receive. What's not working if victims are not able to trust the system and institutions that work against human trafficking? Because clearly there is a lack of trust. Mr. Anson, since 2019, since the last national strategy, because as I mentioned, there have been others, how are you working in order to increase detection of human trafficking? Do you feel better equipped in 2023 to prevent and stop human trafficking?
Merci encore pour la question.
Thank you again for the question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I cannot necessarily speak to what is not working. I can certainly speak to what is working. I would say that, thanks to increased support and awareness, the CBSA in particular has worked diligently to increase our awareness, to increase and evolve in an iterative fashion the range of training that is provided to BSOs, and ensuring that our ports of entry are not mechanisms for supporting or facilitating the trafficking of persons, particularly women, girls, and gender-diverse people that will then be exploited here domestically. What else is working is that, specifically from the intelligence program perspective within the agency, we were initially asked to provide, I think the target was 11 intelligence reports a year that would provide greater awareness and indicators and warnings. We've, to date since 2019, we've produced over 145. Currently, we're producing approximately 35 per year. These are very detailed, informative intelligence reports that give a list and enumeration of different types of things to look for as they evolve. That also highlight and identify the evolving exploitation of our immigration processes. How are they transiting borders? What are the indicators and warnings in a vehicle of somebody that is potentially being trafficked? What are the behavioral, visual, and travel patterns that are identifiable by a BSO?
Thank you, Daniel. We're now going to pass it over to Leah Gazan for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm just continuing on Mr. Anson. So we know the best way to protect women is to use harm reduction approaches. Sex trafficking is certainly an issue, but according to the CBC on May 11, 2015, in regards to human trafficking, Jean McDonald, who worked, I don't know if they still do, Maggie's, the Toronto Sex Worker Action Project, said this in quotes, "People swept up in human trafficking investigations should be offered permanent residency and immediate immunity from deportation." I share that, based on my colleague's question about fears many individuals who are being sex trafficked, fears of coming forward because of fear of deportation. Do you agree that one of the ways to protect women would be to offer permanent residency in sex trafficking cases so that they feel more safe to come forward with information?
Right. Thank you very much for the question. Thank you, Madam Chair. In terms of the immigration continuum and in consideration of assessing each individual case, I'm not qualified to speak. That is certainly the domain of IRCC, and that is an issue for probably the case management area within IRCC. So I cannot speak to that other than, again, like to highlight the fact that there are mechanisms in place and options available to people that have been already victimized or traumatized, and very specifically, they take into account victims of gender-based violence, which I think is a really important consideration. But it's not necessarily my domain.
So fair enough. But in saying that, from your experience, is one of the hesitancies women coming forward who are sex trafficked? What is one of the hesitancies or fears? Has it been fear of being deported? Yes or no? Just because I have limited time, I think we only have time for a yes or no.
Understood. I would say generally, thank you, Madam Chair, again for the question. In general, there is always a reticence to report for a variety of different reasons, a multiplicity of situations that surface. Most particularly, people that arrive through smuggling channels do not necessarily have legitimate status in Canada. If you do not have a real passport or a real status to be employed as a foreign national, then that's another indicator or another situation where somebody would be absolutely apprehensive from raising that. In terms of fear of deportation, again, that is something
Perfect.
that I'm not necessarily able to speak to,
Thank
but
you.
the natural influence.
Thanks so much. We're now going to pass it over to Michelle Ferry. Michelle, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you so much to our witnesses for being here. Very important topic. In my riding, it's Peterborough Kawartha, and it's right along the 401 corridor. You know, I'm curious what you guys think, and again, I'll open it to anybody. I guess, Mr. Hanson, it may not tie into you as much, but maybe Ms. Demers. The 401 corridor seems to be an extreme hot spot for human trafficking. What do you think we could be doing to stop that?
Thank you for that question, Madam Chair. In my experience, we've been working in partners with people, like organizations such as Via Rail. They travel right along the 401 and other police of jurisdictions to really bring awareness to what they are seeing and the targets and how to manage that.
There's no like particular program per se other than sort of this communication amongst the organizations but there's no like, is there anything key in place that says this is the program we're working on right now to target it?
We work together in partnerships. We share information. It's a priority for all of the partners that I personally work with, and we do know that this is an area of risk. We share awareness products, training pieces, and we're in constant communication with each other.
Thank you. Ms. Vanda Bogart, did I say that right? Thank you. One of the key things that I think is really critical to solve a problem or crisis is data. And, you know, I've witnessed this firsthand in my community again. A young woman who was homeless was a victim of trafficking. And she didn't get the media attention. Nobody really looked for her. I mean, her mother fought tooth and nail. They were able to find her because of social media. But I don't even know that she would have been reported. How do we close this gap of data? As you know, my colleague, Ms. Gazan, has said, the numbers aren't truly reflective of how big this is. How do we fix that?
Question. So you're right. This is a crime that is underreported, and we know that. We do work closely with Statistics Canada to garner data so that we are informing our strategy on as much data as possible. But I would go back and maybe talk about awareness, because we've talked about the fact that we need to ensure that Canadians understand what human trafficking is, understand signs of possible human trafficking, and understand how to report signs of human trafficking. And under our prevention pillar, we've been doing a lot, public safety has been doing a lot on awareness campaigns. We spoke just earlier on, you know, how would you describe human trafficking? And in 2021, we launched our It's Not What It Seems campaign, because a lot of Canadians don't understand that, you know, many people are trafficked by their boyfriends, by their intimate partners, by people that they know, right? So I think that data collection is absolutely key, and it's an area that we need to continue to work on, but awareness is key as well. And awareness in the general public, but also in, you know, service industries, places where people are trafficked. We're working on some guidelines right now in 4 key areas to support frontline workers in in the service industry to be able to better support, understand signs of human trafficking, and if they see that, how do they report it? And I think that's a way that we can also work on ensuring that people understand, can report, and that reporting becomes data.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I know even my own children right now, like my son's in grade 8, and he came home. They did a great big symposium on human trafficking. And I mean, that's how a lot of change happens, right? Our kids come home and educate us. So I know it is changing, because I know I never learned about it in my years at school. So it is good to see that. Ms. Taplin, if I may, once a victim is identified and provides a statement or evidence, what steps are taken to provide resources to the victim to prevent them from returning to that lifestyle? Because we know that the person who's taken them has really, coercive control is very, very challenging to get back into a healthy lifestyle and to have trust again.
I'm just going to interrupt here because we're getting so close to the end of this panel. I know this will be a long. If you want to provide just a little bit of a brief oversight, but perhaps the rest of that could be in writing, because there'll be so many steps to that on what we can do. So I'll allow only 15 seconds for that answer and then pass it over to Marc Sauret.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. Mindful of the time constraint, the RCMP provides and works with victim services at the local level and nationally, and we refer all victims to the appropriate victim services within the community to provide extended services to those victims.
Excellent.
Happy to expand that.
Thank you so much. We would greatly appreciate it. Marc, you've got the last 5.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. My first question will be for Ms. Van de Bogart from Public Safety. For the hotline, we've heard in other studies on mental health, for example, that we just finished, that services for municipalities and communities for supporting women and girls had a lot of issues. You mentioned that you have a hotline that is 24/7 for victims who call. But do you have any information on the shortcomings and the challenges that your team might have in referring victims to services that might not exist in a smaller municipality versus a larger city?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
I know that you're going to be hearing directly from the hotline next, and so I'm sure that they'll be able to provide some specific information there. I will tell you that they provide services in over 200 languages. It's not just for victims, but it's also for people who may have some questions about, I see somebody who may be, who I may think is human trafficked, and so I know they'll be asking you detailed questions. I would say that in addition to the work being done with the hotline, the 63 projects that we've funded, and specifically 20 from a public safety's perspective, to grassroots organizations across the country. We've done that purposely because we know one size does not fit all. We know that we need to be able to support those communities that know their communities, know what's going on within their communities, and what services that they're required. I would also just quickly say that when we did our initial consultations to build the strategy in 2018, we heard from our over 200 stakeholders 3 key principles. In order for the strategy to be effective in anything that we do, it needs to be culturally responsive, trauma-informed, and survivor-centric. And I think that if we built our strategy on those 3 principles, and like I said, the commitments within our strategy, we ensure that those principles are enshrined in there, because gaining support and confidence by both victims to be able to report and survivors to be able to reach out for assistance is really important. We don't want to re-traumatize, we don't want to re-victimize, and so I think that's important as well. I will just lastly say we are doing an official evaluation of these this current strategy because we are in the last year, and that official evaluation is going to help us in identifying gaps and challenges, celebrating successes, but actually helping us to shape the restructuring of the renewal of the strategy moving forward.
Merci.
Thank you. Another question for Mr. Hansen, and then Ms. Van de Bogart if we have time. Earlier, you mentioned that you don't have the control at the border of refugees. We also heard that a lot of people who are trafficked today, and we know that the numbers are increasing, and we heard in the news recently from Panama, Colombia, Haiti, that a lot of refugees will arrive in the U.S. and Canada in the coming months. What measures are you taking as of today? Because for human trafficking, it's quite possible that the numbers will increase significantly. So what have you done to prepare for this?
Merci pour la question, monsieur.
Thank you for the question.
Just to clarify one point, we absolutely are a significant point of the process in bringing on refugees within Canada. It's not something that we've necessarily lost control of. That's not necessarily an issue. It's something that I'm not speaking to today. Regarding the specific question that you asked, though, sir and Madam Chair, is that yes, there are new countries of origin that are arriving in Canada. There are continually evolving migration patterns, both regular and irregular, through official, unofficial channels and processes, be them smuggled as well, or through trafficking, if in certain circumstances. Our intelligence reporting is exactly how the agency adjusts and continues to modify our approach regarding specific countries of origin. There are a lot of different changing and evolving migration patterns day to day, month to month, and in many cases subject to the events or the geopolitical situations abroad, as well as changing legislation in some of our partner nations, and certainly within North America, Central and South America. Intelligence reporting allows us to continue to assess what percentages, what proportions of these arriving populations are potentially victims, users of human smuggling networks and chains, and what types of organized crime groups are supporting these processes, but also which nations are potentially presenting more frequently as those producing victims of human trafficking. So that is exactly how the agency is focused on continuing evolving towards the threat.
Thank you so much. We have allowed this panel to go on a little bit longer, but I know that there was a lot of information that was really important that we got so that we could build the foundation to our study. So I'd really like to thank all of you for coming and providing that information. I know that there has been a few requests for follow-up, so we'll be following that up with you as well. So we will be suspending for about 1 minute because we will have people immediately get in here. So I'm going to ask for the exchange of the panel, and we'll get started immediately. So suspension. are ready to go, and this is how fast we're rolling it. So the meeting's resumed. I would like to welcome our witnesses today, and I'm just going to advise that all sound checks were completed and have been successful for any of the panels as well. So today from the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking, we have Julia Drydyk, who is the Executive Director, and you'll find her online there. And we also have in the room, from Creating Opportunities and Resources Against the Trafficking of Humans, Kyla Clark, who is the Program Coordinator. Thank you very much for joining us. We will provide you each 6 or 5 minutes for opening statements, and we will begin with Julia. Julia, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Oh, don't do anything with this. Sorry.
Oh.
Get that away from me. I don't know why I got excited. Okay, so you go ahead and just forget about the chair being crazy. You go right ahead.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much to members of the committee for having me here today. My name is Julia Drydyk, and I'm the Executive Director at the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking. The Centre is a national charity dedicated to ending all types of human trafficking in Canada. We work to mobilize systems change by collaborating and working with various stakeholders to advance best practices, share research, and eliminate duplicate efforts across Canada. In May of 2019, the Centre launched the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline, a confidential multilingual service that operates 24/7 to connect victims and survivors with social services and/or law enforcement if they so choose. I want to share 3 truths with you today that I've learned throughout my time at the Centre. And the first is that no one really knows how pervasive human trafficking is in Canada. The few data sets that we do have are incredibly limited in the information that they're able to capture. And this means that the number of marginalized individuals that do show up in our data sets represent only the tip of the iceberg. That said, the information that we do have is concerning. A staggering 90% of survivors who contact our hotline identify as female. This finding may be intuitive to some Canadians, but it provides additional evidence that human trafficking, and particularly sex trafficking, needs to be understood and addressed as gender-based violence. We also know that approximately 2% of the victims and survivors who contact the hotline identify as transgender men, women, or gender-diverse individuals. This means that these groups are 8 times more overrepresented in our data relative to their share of the population. Governments must do more to understand how trafficking impacts high-risk communities, including how it's perpetrated, discussed, and understood amongst these groups. We all need to do a better job to tailor our supports to meet those unique cultural needs. The second truth is that human trafficking is a symptom of much deeper socioeconomic factors. Trafficking can happen to anyone, but those who are most economically disadvantaged are at greater risk. In 2017, the United Nations found that Canadian institutions have historically denied Black Canadians equitable access to economic opportunities. This has led to higher levels of poverty, poor educational outcomes, incarceration, and health disparities amongst Black Canadians. And we know that this is also true for other historically marginalized groups, including Indigenous women and girls, the 2S LGBTQIA+ community, and migrant workers. Governments need to work holistically to address the economic inequality that makes exploitation and human trafficking possible in our country. The third truth is that we need to be thoughtful and careful about when and how we involve law enforcement. Many survivors fear police for very understandable reasons. In most cases, survivors are seeking access to counseling, shelters, and other services when they call the hotline. Speaking with law enforcement is just simply not a priority for the majority of survivors who contact us looking to exit their trafficking situation. Fortunately, some police agencies are responding to this feedback. In Ontario, specially trained police services are actually stepping back, and they're allowing service providers to lead. This allows service providers to stabilize the situation by addressing a survivor's immediate needs and building trust. Later, police, who have been trained in trauma-informed care, are then brought in to initiate their investigation. And we need to see more police agencies examining and adopting this model across Canada. I want to share one last observation on the limitations of our criminal justice system. In Canada, there's an over-reliance on testimonial evidence to prosecute human trafficking cases. Victims are often reluctant to share details about their exploitation for fear, shame, and difficulty recalling traumatic experiences. we know that the court process in and of itself can be very traumatizing, which acts as a disincentive for survivors to seek justice. Within this context, maybe it's unsurprising that the current approach rarely leads to successful convictions. A 2019 Statistics Canada report found that less than 1 in 10 trafficking charges result in a guilty verdict. Canada's low prosecution rate is concerning. It's telling us that human trafficking continues to be a high reward and low risk crime. Finding justice for victims while reducing harm will require a significant shift away from standard practices, and we need to move towards approaches that better leverage other types of evidence. I want to thank the committee again for inviting me to speak with you today, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Wonderful, and thank you very much. And we now have Kyla Clark. Kyla, I'll pass the floor over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today to share my thoughts on how to combat human trafficking, especially human trafficking of youth in Canada. Creating opportunities and resources against the trafficking of humans, or CORATH, works with youth and young adults aged 12 to 24 in and around the Ottawa area who are experiencing or are at risk of human trafficking, most often for the purpose of sexual exploitation. Having been with the Robert Smart Centre in CORATH for nearly 2 years, I've seen firsthand how vulnerable youth are to being trafficked and have observed a significant shift in the age of our clients. Since CORATH's inception, we have observed the average age move from 16 years old to 12 and 13 years old. This may be linked in part to changes around the online browsing habits of youth since the start of the pandemic. Social media is a powerful tool for our youth and provides instant access to people they may not have met otherwise. In one instance, we had a youth who friended somebody via Instagram, and within the hour was engaging in sexual activities. It can take mere minutes to make friends online, assume they are safe, and then meet them in real time. In this digital age, smartphones provide 24/7 access to hypersexualized media and pornography. It's easy to access, it's free, and it's hardcore. Dr. Gail Dines noted that the average age of first viewing of pornography, whether intentionally or accidentally, is estimated by some researchers to be 12, and anecdotal research suggests as young as 8 years old. This type of online exposure undermines the healthy development of our children and youth and has contributed to school boards taking on an almost frontline role, seeing the need for bold action against the threat of sex trafficking of school-aged children. We have also seen important changes to how youth are being exploited, making it clear that a combination of approaches is needed to protect our youth. The place to start is with education and awareness. We need youth, their families, and the public to know about the risks of human trafficking, to understand the tactics that traffickers use to recruit, and to ensure youth have the tools they need to protect themselves. Many of the youth we see at CORATH have benefited from learning about recognizing unhealthy relationships, strategies for setting clear boundaries, online safety, and transportation safety. Many youth take public transit to get around without adult supervision. This is a prime recruitment location. Many are also trafficked via public transit. In another instance, we had two 12-year-olds who were bored during COVID and began to ride the buses and trains. Within a couple weeks, they had met some older youth, started using substances, changed their makeup, were appearing with new gifts, all in the matter of a few weeks. To that end, we need public transit personnel trained to identify and intervene in cases of human trafficking, knowing what sexual exploitation can look like, recognizing instances of grooming, and understanding how to intervene. Similar to public transit, training should also be available to hotel employees and others in the service industry who may encounter human trafficking. You may have heard the saying that human trafficking can happen to anyone, regardless of their socioeconomic status. That is true, and we have seen cases with youth from all backgrounds. However, we can't ignore that some youth demographics are at more risk than others. Many youth who are at risk of being trafficked come from vulnerable populations, such as those experiencing poverty, homelessness, familial rejection due to gender identity, cultural discrimination, or trauma. We refer to these as the invisible identities. It is critical that we have systems in place with readily available access to support and resources including safe housing, mental health services, education, and job training. A one-size-fits-all approach to reaching and servicing these communities will not work.
You have about 30 seconds left, and I know we've got one full page, so 30 seconds.
Great, thanks. Korath itself is a collaboration between the Robert Smart Center, the Children's Aid Society, the Elizabeth Fry Society, and U-Turn Youth Support Services. This collaboration needs to continue in order to combat human trafficking. We need to use a trauma-informed approach, including lived experience and survivor voices and policies, programs, and policing. We can prevent trafficking, support victims, and build a safer and more just society for all. Thank you. It's perfect timing.
I'm sorry about that. That's the one that wakes me up in the morning. So that was my more aggressive one, so I do apologize. So thank you guys so much, and I do apologize for that. We are going to start off with our first round of questioning. It's 6 minutes each. We'll start off with Dominique. Dominique, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Welcome to both of our witnesses. My first question is for Ms. Drydick. Hopefully I've pronounced your name correctly. You mentioned in your opening remarks that governments need to do more to understand the impact of human trafficking to at-risk communities. What did you mean by governments need to do more? What do we need to understand from that recommendation?
Human trafficking is experienced very differently in communities across Canada, depending on where you are or what your background is. The language is different, what it looks like is different. And so we need to be working in partnership and funding frontline organizations so that we're really in tune with the realities on the ground. Unfortunately, the word human trafficking is a dirty word amongst most of our youth in Canada. It takes a lot for someone to identify as human trafficking survivors or victims. Sometimes they choose to never do so. And so we need to see targeted, thoughtful, and evidence-based outreach strategies so that we're developing materials for prevention, but also to support that are responsive to the realities on the ground.
The previous panelists stated that the web is quite large, and these are police agencies that are having a hard time with the situation. Is that also your impression? How can we as parliamentarians and as a committee do better than them?
So a lot of the people that we serve have real fears and issues in engaging with law enforcement. So when you look at the people touched by human trafficking that call the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline, the biggest group are actually victims and survivors, but that's followed by friends and family. So one of the reasons I think that we're seeing this big increase in human trafficking is because we are seeing progress on awareness and education. As more people are given the tools to be able to really detect what might be happening in front of them, they're reaching out for help. And that's actually great news. But I think that we really need a community-based response to this. Many victims and survivors of trafficking are reinforced to be afraid of cops. They're told that they are doing something illegal and wrong. The shame and the stigma is intense. And in many ways, that's a reality of their experiences. And so we need to be working with schools and community groups and parents to break through that web because so many of the barriers to coming forward to law enforcement are so real. Many victims and survivors are also coerced or forced into conducting criminal activity for their traffickers' gain. So we really need to be creating safe spaces where the individual is protected and their human rights are put at the very forefront of whatever interventions are put in place.
Tell me, where does that fear stem from? Police officers are supposed to help us, support us, And I think, well, that's what I think anyway. What's not working if they don't know you, they don't know the existence of the hotline? What happens if they can't turn to police agencies? What causes this fear of reaching out to police agencies?
As a tool to coerce their victims into the commercial sex industry, traffickers will often try to isolate individuals from their networks, their friends and their family. They're lied to, they're told that they will get in trouble or that they will get arrested. But I also cannot overstate the stigma and the shame that is imposed on victims and survivors as part of their trafficking because they are engaged in the commercial sex industry. If you look at issues of sexism, and the over-sexualization of women as well, and how they are told to feel guilty and bad about it, that is one of the things that is also really holding people coming back to come forward to law enforcement. And in reality, law enforcement are actually quite low on the list for survivors that contact the hotline. The first thing is usually going to find emergency housing, case management. So that's where you've got a service navigator who's really walking with you to access basic needs and services, as well as supportive counseling. So it's usually several calls in, or sometimes years down the line, when an individual feels ready to engage with law enforcement. Where we see the most positive outcomes for the individual is when they are able to access those community supports to exit their situation and to start rebuilding their lives. But we hear this from survivors daily, that the stigma and the shame that is imposed on them makes them feel isolated and unable to access help.
Je comprends. Puis bon.
I understand. And earlier, they were talking about training for police officers. So when we're talking about violence against women, there needs to be a specific approach. I imagine I don't have a lot of time left, Madam Chair. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to pass it over to Anita Vandenbelt. Anita, 6 minutes.
Thank you so much for both of our witnesses for being here today. And I'd like to, I have a few questions about the awareness and education piece. But before I do that, I want to pick up on something that Ms. Dridick, that you said, and that has to do with the housing. And one of the stakeholders in my riding that I've engaged with is the Child and Youth Permanency Council of Canada. And one of the things that they're doing is a danger period is when children age out of care. So children who are in the child welfare system, they turn 18, they have no family, they have no resources, and suddenly they're out in the street, and that is the moment. And many of them, of course, Indigenous, racialized, and that's when there's nothing for them, and many of them end up trafficked. And so in my constituency, they're looking for a way to create housing, maybe special dedicated housing that would be trauma-informed in terms of locked doors and things like that. Is that something, I'll start with Ms. Dridick, but I can see that Ms. Clark is nodding as well. So if I can get you both to answer about that particular piece. Go ahead.
And we'll start. Housing is the number one biggest need that's requested for a referral service through the hotline. And so this often looks like emergency housing when they're trying to exit, but it's precarious housing and lack of affordable housing solutions overall that are putting our youth in this vulnerable situation. It's disgusting to say out loud, but traffickers actually look for individuals that aren't having their basic needs met. In order to lure and groom them into sex trafficking. And while a lot of the awareness materials talk about, luring and grooming someone with expensive purses and clothes, unfortunately, more often than not, it's also the promise of a safe place to sleep and the promise of unconditional love. So while there are absolutely needs for trauma-informed shelters across the country, we also need to be looking at the affordable housing situation. And I want to say that the emergency shelter issue, we're seeing it crumble across the country in small communities and large. We will even get calls in the middle of the night from survivors looking to exit in cities as big as Ottawa and Montreal, and where there's not a single shelter bed available in the city to house them. And that doesn't even mean that they're necessarily trauma-informed or suitable for the needs of survivors. So really, we're seeing the housing systems collapse directly aggravate the experiences of human trafficking in our country.
I would add that one of the barriers we're coming across is substance use. So a lot of housing that is available requires somebody to be in recovery with no active substance use.
The particular piece about the children aging out of the child welfare system?
So that's been an interesting avenue, I would say. We do have a couple organizations here in Ottawa that have a house for women who have been trafficked, but the aging out, working with CAS, they have been willing to keep kids on their caseload up until 21, and that has helped give us extra time to develop those life skills so that they can be successful.
So much. My other question is about the awareness, and both of you talked about education and awareness, and you mentioned the transit system, which is something that I wouldn't have thought of, and so there's obviously in the general public not much awareness about the extent of this, but also where children are being targeted. I wonder, because we obviously have to reach people where they are, and I've seen in nightclubs where in the women's bathroom there are posters, which the men wouldn't necessarily see that those posters are there. Things like that. I wonder if you can tell me more about how we reach the people that need to know about this, and also how we reach the people like the family members who don't know that they need to know about this, but they do. I'll start with Ms. Clark.
Thank you for your question. We do have a 24/7 support line as well, so we get a lot of calls from concerned parents just trying to figure out, what could this possibly be, what's been happening. I think that I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. I think it's boots on the ground. So going where the youth are hanging out. Locally, the Rideau Centre is a big one. The Gloucester Centre is a big one. Malls are, so even working with mall security and having them be able to recognize the signs of grooming and things like that.
Ms. Driddick?
I think we need multiple methods and different ways of starting a conversation in communities and at home. So we absolutely need to be meeting youth where they're at. And as much as it's very hard to be having conversations about sex and this type of sexual activity with our youth, we need to start having the speed dinner table conversations, because simple messaging isn't enough. Unfortunately, we are still trying to fix some of the problems that came with really poor education previously, where someone appears to be handcuffed to a radiator and with a looming man's head in the background. I've heard from survivors that thinking that human trafficking needed to involve kidnapping or forcible confinement actually kept them in their trafficking situation longer. And so this really needs to be about having open conversations in our schools, in our community centers, and in the media to talk about the spectrum of unhealthy relationships, the spectrum of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence, and to give youth the tools to identify that and exit sooner rather than later.
Excellent.
We did a comprehensive campaign last year.
I do have to cut you off. We do have more questionnaires, so I'm going to actually pass it over to Luc Thériault. Luc, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to both witnesses. It was very interesting. Earlier, we heard from the CBSA, and we heard from the Department of Public Safety and the RCMP. And I was concerned to see that if we had to examine only their actions, we wouldn't be able to make much of a dent in the fight against human trafficking, because if I understand correctly, it is the clandestine nature of this and how they are tricking victims using the ruse of being a good Samaritan. And that isolates victims, and it becomes impossible to identify the ruse at the border, for example. You may not have the answer to my question, and I have many, and that's all right, but you work with victims, or you work closely with them. And I understand that working uphill in awareness is important, and downstream, taking care of them is important. But what comes out of their perception of police intervention? What have they said that would allow us to have recommendations on what more the RCMP could do, or more what police services or the CBSA could do, or what do they need to do less of? Would you perhaps have an answer that would come from the conversations that you've had with victims?
Allez-y.
You may start, Ms. Clark, first, and then Ms. Drydick. Is this something that you think you can answer?
I can add some thoughts. I think generally what we're seeing is that youth have had many encounters with police already up until the point before the exploitation, and that's sort of where this disconnect happens, is based on their previous experiences. But I think if service providers with law enforcement could work together more effectively, then we wouldn't be re-traumatizing the victim by having them tell their story 6-7 times, whether it's a police officer or the hospital or this person or that person. I know in Ottawa the officers go in plain clothes. They don't make the victim come to the police station. They can meet them in the community and try to bridge that gap in that way. Thank you.
The vast majority of individuals that experience trafficking where CBSA is involved are those migrant workers that are coming into Canada through temporary foreign worker permits and largely experiencing labor trafficking in our agricultural and manufacturing sectors. We recently conducted research with 77 migrant workers from across Ontario, and the biggest call to action that they had, or among the biggest, was actually to get information about their rights before they arrive in Canada, at arrival, and after. Unfortunately, the telltale signs of exploitation don't normally occur until after they've actually gone through the turnstile at immigration and realized that they were sold a completely different bill of goods than what they signed up for when they were coming to work in our farms and in our manufacturing sector. So it really is about making sure that they have information about what their rights are, making sure that that's information in their mother tongue and at appropriate literacy levels, and making sure that they're getting that information consistently, because often it is a spectrum. It doesn't start off as labor trafficking or as sex trafficking. Usually there's earlier stages of exploitation, perhaps poor working conditions, unpaid wages, and then it's that combined with the element of coercion and fear where you see it fall within the Canadian Criminal Code definition of human trafficking. So really we need continuous supports and services and proactive educational campaigns targeted to those individuals in order to see a difference.
Okay.
We know that the pandemic made a lot of the factors worse, including isolation. But what impact did the pandemic have on your organization? Did you receive an increase of cases? Was there a lack of means? Are you still feeling the effects of the pandemic? Do you have an idea of the situation?
Madame Drydick.
Ms. Drydick, please, or Ms. Clark? My questions are always for both.
I can definitively say that human trafficking did not go down during the pandemic. We've seen a significant increase in calls and cases identified over the last few years, but part of that also might be as a result of our targeted education awareness. So following last year's Human Trafficking Awareness Day, we've seen a 50% increase of calls to the hotline, but we're not sure if that's attributable to COVID, the general state of affairs, or it's because there's more awareness out there. What I can say is the biggest impact that we've seen has been on our frontline service delivery partners. When the pandemic hit, over 80% of services either closed entirely or had to drastically change the way they were operating. We saw some great commitments from all levels of government to fund additional services.
Fantastic.
If those are drying up.
Thank you so much. We're now going to pass it over to Leah Gazan. Leah, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much. My first question is for Madame Drydick. Could you share how your organization defines sex trafficking and sex work? Is it the same or is it different?
So, put very simply, human trafficking is the exploitation of someone else for your personal gain. So, not all consensual sex work has anything to do with human trafficking. They're completely different, in fact. Where we look at human trafficking is when there's another individual that is threatening, coercing, and forcing someone into the commercial sex industry and where they are profiting. It's also where you see individuals not feel able to exit, again, because of the fear and the threats imposed on them.
Thank you so much. Just a very quick follow-up. I asked that question because the Butterfly Asian and Migrant Sex Worker Support Network indicated that in an article, it's in March 2019, that racialized and migrant workers, I'm reading directly, are often subjugated to surveillance, harassed, arrested, detained, and deported, even when there's no evidence that they've engaged in human trafficking, and because of that, less likely to go forward should they be in trouble because of a criminal response or how they're criminalized for what they're doing, and it actually places them more at risk. So it's not surprising to me that in the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls, they actually support a legalization of sex work as a harm reduction and protection for women, girls, and Two-Spirit. This is actually a question for both of you. We know there was research done, it was titled Trafficking and the Intersection, Racism, Colonialism, Sexism, and Exploitation in Canada. And their article concludes that, discourse about human trafficking is often disconnected from a critique of racial and colonial oppression. Public policies prioritize law enforcement, support for victims, and individual vigilant, but leave matters of structural change, community and personal healing, and social justice underexploited. An effective fight against human trafficking must also work to ameliorate the underlying structural oppressions and historical legacies. I would, Madame or Kyla Clark, I know that you mentioned that about housing. You spoke about kids aging out of care. I know that in the National Inquiry, aging out of care or kids in care, it's seen as a pipeline for MMIWG. For example, you spoke, Madame Didick, about the issue around housing. I put forward a bill for a guaranteed livable basic income. I think it would be a game changer, for example, for kids aging out of care, or to provide people that, whether in sex work or even trying to exit sex trafficking, real resources to be, and real choices, not even to be exploited in violent relationships or situations. Like you said, people, it's not purses people want, it's housing and food and shelter that lures a lot of people into sex trafficking. I'm wondering if you can comment on that. I'll start with you, Kyla Clark, and then I'll move over to you, Madame Didick.
Sorry. So I think you've touched on a really important point in terms of livable wage. I think another barrier to this is oftentimes victims and survivors don't have ID, they don't have any identification, so that's a barrier to housing, bank accounts, and things like that. But I think there's a lot of talk about, a lot of the laws have been made around this idea of an ideal victim. So they're white, they're straight, part of the heteronormative community, right? So I think it's really important that we're bringing in in talking about the MMW and individual identities and youth that identify as 2S LGBTQ+.
Thank you very much for that. Madame Didick?
I absolutely agree that we need a comprehensive social change to actually end human trafficking, which is my and my organization's mission. A lot of this is coming because there are individuals that are preying on people that are vulnerable because of systemic forms of oppression and discrimination. So while there's a lot of effort that is going into unpacking and unlearning a lot of what our institutions have imposed on us over the years, the legacy of racism, colonialism, and sexism in our policing systems are still experienced by people every single day. And that is also why we say that you can't arrest your way out of this problem. It is about deep-seated social inequalities. And a lot of that comes from income inequality, poverty.
So I want to ask you a question about that. I'm been very clear that I think that we need to refund communities and put those resources in communities rather than policing oppression and human rights violations. Would you agree?
We have seen some of the best outcomes where they've done just that in Durham region and other areas where victim services are the primary outreach and communication tool to engage with people that might be experiencing sexual exploitation and where cops take the back seat.
Perfect. Okay,
So
I'm going to have to
agree.
cut you off. Thank you. Perfect. We've got one more round. What we're going to do is it's 5, 5, 2.5, 2.5, and then we'll call it quits there. So I'm going to start off with Michelle, and I know you two are sharing your time. Michelle and Anna, 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm sharing my time, so I'll be as quick as I can. Thank you both for being here. Great witness testimony, and it sounds like you've maybe worked with some of the folks in my riding of Peterborough Kawartha as well, so I really appreciate your information. Really curious about if you've ever went down the avenue of working with former perpetrators or sort of restored perpetrators who could help in better understanding what makes a human trafficker, like going at it from another angle of helping the victim, and also from an education perspective, how do we educate our young boys, our young people on how not to do that? And I guess I'll start with you, Ms. Drydick.
Tamaya Nagy has been on the forefront of this, but I'll share some of what she has learned. Just like individuals can be lured and groomed into being trafficked victims, we also see that traffickers are also lured and groomed into being traffickers. And so this, again, really looks at underpinning the issues of how are Canadians growing up to do such horrible things. And a big part of it is misogyny, patriarchy, but also what happens when you see such high rates of poverty and growing income inequality. It means that we're forced to kind of go at each other instead of work together. So I think a holistic approach is really needed to get at the root cause of how it's possible that anyone treats anyone in this regard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to refer to a case, January 18, 2018. I know that this is a law case where a perpetrator had his conviction overturned May 18, 2022, and instead of serving the 17 and a half years that he was supposed to serve, was able to cut it down to 6 years and will be out in less than 6 months. So you mentioned earlier about the use of schools, community groups to help for safe spaces. You also mentioned they are afraid of police officers. You stated earlier the fear that people have coming forward. I think our laws are broken, and I think our system, the crime that's committed the penalty does not meet the crime. It doesn't fit the crime. I have spoken to police officers and they're frustrated. The particular case that I referred to that was overturned, the young lady who was referred to as PL, who won't be named, she was afraid to come forward because she knew that her perpetrator was going to be out on bail and he had threatened her and her family. How do we prevent that? Julia, would you
I can jump into that.
Anyone,
These are all very real and rational concerns that victims and survivors have, and it makes perfect sense not to go through the criminal justice system when this is what they're dealing with. There are revolving doors when it comes to traffickers coming out and then threatening potential victims. We also see that court cases take 2 to 3 times longer than any other court case in Canada with really low conviction rates. But I think one of the things we also really need to do is to be looking at latent bias within the judiciary. Too often, victims, when they're being cross-examined, are treated like they did this to themselves. Excuse my language, but they are slut-shamed. They are told that they made decisions, that this was their boyfriend, similar to how we've seen other forms of rape and sexual violence cases not perform in the best interest of victims actually achieving justice. So I think we need to flip the dial and provide more training at the judiciary.
So would you agree that this bail system is not working for the victims? Because from what I've heard, speaking to both to the police officers, they're just as frustrated. They put these guys, they put them behind bars, they're let out, then they go ahead, they basically victimize the victim once again, and they're afraid. They're afraid to come out. They're afraid because they fear for their life and their family's life. So we have to fix the bail system before we can, get this problem fixed. Do you agree?
I agree, and also many victims and survivors choose just to escape and exit. They will go to a safe house and they'll put their safety first before risking it in order to engage in criminal justice systems. So there is not adequate safety and protection, and I would say that our criminal justice system is failing survivors of sexual violence and failing survivors of human trafficking in Canada.
Thank you so much. We're now going to go online to Sonia Sidhu. Sonia, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, both of you, having a great testimony. So my first question is to Ms. Drydak. In Ontario, research has shown 90% of victims are female and 42% were first trafficked before the age of 18. What are the primary factors that contribute to the increased risk of human trafficking, especially women, girls, and gender diverse people in Canada? And also, we talked about the migrant workers, and any population who is on the study visa is also impacted.
That is very accurate. We also see international students are vulnerable to exploitation. The list of potential risk factors is almost never ending, but it comes down to a place of not having basic needs met, being socially isolated, and then you also see the compounding issues of racism, colonialism, and sexism on top of that. So there's not one thing to look for. We'll look for people that might be vulnerable to human trafficking or at risk. It's individuals that might be having problems at home. They don't know where they're going to sleep that night. They're not getting consistent food. They're not having stability in their lives. So again, having a country where there is an actual strong and robust safety net for every child to have a safe adult to go to. Not everyone is also born into families where that's their parents, making sure that our school systems and community networks are well equipped and trained to be able to make sure that no child falls behind.
And as a follow-up question, you have 24/7 confidential hotline, and it's in multi-languages. How we can work together to integrate prevention with schools, with institution, and with the other population, which we just mentioned. You mentioned that.
If we're going to end human trafficking, this is all about prevention. So I often tell people if something feels wrong in your gut, it probably is. And the benefit of us being a completely confidential hotline that's independent of law enforcement and of government is that we're able to talk to someone based on their unique circumstances. I think sometimes people are afraid because they're worried it's like 911, whereas we're completely the opposite. We're able to share information, be a trauma-informed, safe place to talk, and just to kind of work through what the situation is and what their options are. Again, 24/7, available in over 200 languages in Canada.
How does your center work with the raising public awareness, and what else we can do so it can be more effective to work to end human trafficking in Canada?
So we do what we can as a charitable organization to do national education awareness campaigns. But I think what we really need to see as a whole of Canada perspective is to make sure that all provinces are acting similarly and in line. So for example, the government of Ontario has invested more than any other province, even probably per capita in anti-human trafficking initiatives. And they're also mandating school boards to provide anti-human trafficking education in the schools. Not all provinces are doing that. And so again, similar, we know that there are human trafficking corridors going through Ontario. Those are extending across the country. So really, if any province does not have a human trafficking strategy in place, then we're going to start people falling between the cracks. And again, traffickers are going to go to those jurisdictions where they're less likely to be detected, and where it might be easier to lure, groom, and profit off of this exploitation of our youth.
Thank you. And Ms. Clark, you want to add on that?
I would add that a lot of our youth struggle to even identify that they are being trafficked or exploited. That can take months if they ever do decide. So that is a barrier to getting them the help they need. But also, in terms of the prevention piece, I think it's important that we are teaching kids in school about healthy relationships and what that looks like, about internet safety. I think that will arm them and serve them well when they're faced with these situations going forward.
30 more seconds.
And just on the last comment, if you say the faith communities can help in that mission, or they can provide some more resources?
Absolutely. I think I often hear from survivors that had there been one adult that they could trust, that showed them that they could go to and they were loved and that they had options, it would have made all of the difference. So I think it's about also equipping our faith communities with information about the realities of human trafficking.
Thank you. We're just having to carry on because we're getting over time here. I'm going to pass it for the next 2.5 minutes to Luc. Luc, you have the floor.
Oui, merci.
Thank you. Ms. Drydick, in your opening remarks at the end, you talked about the limits of the justice system. Ms. Clark mentioned the approaches used by police officers and how victims are asked to repeat their stories. But at the very end, you stated that only 1 in 10 complaints leads to a guilty verdict. But what other elements could be used to prove that there was human trafficking?
FinTrack has done work to be able to trace some of the financial proceeds and gain through illicit crime. Usually it is also connected to other forms of illegal activity. So that's where you can see other forms of money laundering, and it can also be tied to guns and drugs as well. And we are currently working with other organizations to explore the use of artificial intelligence and alternative sources of data. However, Canada's lack of a regulatory system to be able to do so ethically while protecting the civil liberties of all Canadians makes that very challenging. So if we can find a way to work collaboratively so that we can get forms of evidence that aren't solely based on victim testimony, it could go a long way towards achieving higher rates of justice.
Mais concrètement.
But more concretely, what could those be?
Au niveau de l'intelligence.
For AI, for example.
So this is very hard because it's hard to think about how to do it in a way that does not conflate human trafficking with consensual sex work. But we do see that there can be trends through online escort and sex work ads. Are the same phone numbers used, other potential indicators of human trafficking. Again, the potential risks in terms of impinging on individuals' civil liberties and their safety and conflating human trafficking and sex work is very hard, but it is something worth exploring.
Donc, vous voulez attaquer le problème.
So we could work at the issue if they're using a strong tool for recruitment with AI. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Much, Luc. And final round of questions to Leah Gazan. Leah, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. And, just building on what you said, Madame Didyk, often strategies to keep people safe are often decided by individuals who, either don't have any experience or aren't experiential or currently aren't being impacted by systems. And I'm a big proponent of, investing in communities and frontline organizations that really lift up the voices of people that are involved. In saying that, certainly that's my bias. I think people that are involved or been impacted should be setting the agenda and deciding on how they can be best protected. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that, and also Kyla Clark.
Engaging and including individuals with lived experience as part of decision making, but also program design, is just simply evidence-based best practice. How would someone without any experiences of what this looked like be able to come up with a solution out of the blue? It's just not. It's not how the world works. So I completely agree that we need to be making sure that there are survivors that are part of every stage of the solution to human trafficking, and doing so in a way that does not just exploit them actually for their own lived experience and their story, but involving them more meaningfully, and what solutions actually look like. And I think we're starting to see a lot of emerging best practices in that across the country.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think conversations like this one are really important, so that we can bring in those survivor voices and that lived experience to really make our work trauma-informed. And I think this is how we, instead of going downstream, we go upstream and pull people out of that river.
Okay. Well, I would like to thank Kyla and Julia. Thank you so much for coming to today's meeting. Before everybody escapes the room, last week you would have been sent a media advisory regarding the human traffic study. I just want to have approval so that we can send that out. I wasn't sure if we had given us if we had given ourselves blanket approval or not, but I'm just wondering if we can get a motion to approve. A motion to approve from Michelle Ferry. All those in favor? Passed. It's passed. Okay, fantastic. Today's meeting is going to be adjourned in a second, but thank you so much. Thanks to the witnesses once again. We'll be meeting once again Thursday at 3:30. Motion to adjourn coming from Mark. Today's meeting's adjourned. Awesome. Thank you.